Thanks so much, Andy. Thanks for having me back. Today, I'm going to talk to you about Feminist City, Claiming Space in a Man-Made World by Dr. Laing-LeClerc. This is a book about living in a woman's body in a city designed for men. So as a designer, I'm fascinated by the hidden affordances and constraints that we embed into the things that we make. We know this is the case for everyday things, but how often do we scale up that thinking to sort of critically examine the way power structures are embedded in and perpetuated by our built environment? Now, I picked this book before we all know what we know now about the tragic death of Sarah Everard. I'd actually gotten in touch with Andy to change the book that I was going to present because it felt a little bit too raw for this moment. But on reflection, I think it offers us a way to make sense of some of the pain and the chaos and to give some shape to the many thoughts that we're having collectively and individually right now. Dr. Laing-LeClerc is an Associate Professor of Geography and Environment and a Director of Women's Studies and Gender Studies at Mount Allison University. In Feminist City, she uses her own experience as well as the lens of intersectional feminism to look at the inequalities that are engineered into our spaces, our cities, our homes, and our neighbourhoods. Through this book, she gives the name to many of the experiences that we encounter as women with public bodies, bodies that deviate from the male default, that are messy and inconvenient in a world that's designed for men, bodies that are too small at times, too big, too sexual, too changeable when we're pregnant, for example, bodies that we as women inhabit with a constant low-grade reminder that we're somehow other, and that these bodies come with the need for extra vigilance. So the first lesson that I want to share from this book is that women's fear serves a social function. So fear has many hidden costs which prevent women from living free and independent lives in cities. There's the social, psychological, and economic ramifications there that are significant. They add to our already overburdened days. You know, we've got the double shift of paid work and unpaid work, the triple shift of dealing with things like racism, homophobia, and ableism, and other forms of discrimination, and then the quadruple shift of maintaining our safety, which isn't really something that I've heard discussed before. So these never-ending precautionary measures eat up our precious time and our energy. Every woman's got a story about getting off a train or a bus at a stop too early because she was afraid of being followed, or taking a long route home to make sure that she was alone. We avoid taking shortcuts through parks and through lanes. We keep our keys in our fists. We pretend we're on the phone to someone, and certain places are completely avoided by us. And all of this adds up to a sort of tiring set of routine and spontaneous safety decisions, as well as that need for constant awareness and vigilance and attention to our safety. Ultimately, these constraints, this safety work that we have to do, leads to an indirect but powerful social control. These socially sponsored fears deter us from fully being able to be in a city and to live our lives fully and freely every day. But, you know, that sounds mad. Like, who could possibly benefit from keeping women in a state of fear? There's an economic cost, surely, that's antithetical to the desires of capitalist society. But society isn't ruled by economics alone. And in a society that confers the most benefits to heterosexual, cis, able-bodied men, their safety, freedom, and economic power is prioritized at the cost of everyone else's. So the second lesson that I took from this book is that we need to think more intersectionally about violence and the impact of anti-violence interventions, which isn't something I'd really considered much before. So not all women experience public spaces in the same way because of their intersecting characteristics. For example, if you were to think of a woman in a hijab who's attacked in the street, who has her headscarf pulled off, she can't separate out the misogyny from the racism and the xenophobia because those things are all entangled. When we're promised safety interventions like more CCTV or surveillance, we make things more dangerous for the likes of sex workers who not only face arrest and violence from the police because of increased visibility, they're also forced to work in less safe environments with greater risk from men. Women who don't have formal immigration status, for example, or who don't speak the local language might be hesitant to use services or spaces that are designed to keep women safe because more visibility has a cost to them as well. So when we attempt to make cities safer for women, which often means white women as a default, we can inadvertently end up making them less safe for other marginalised groups. What Laing-LeClerc talks about here is taking a feminist sort of lens to grapple with some of these power dynamics. When you ask sort of women's questions about spaces, you're asking about way more than gender. You've got to wonder if your desire for safety will result in the increased policing of people of colour. You've got to wonder how your increased need for buggy access can be reconciled with the needs of disabled or elderly people. You've got to think about how your claim for urban space can perpetuate, say, colonial practices, for example. So yeah, the real lesson here is that you need to take an intersectional approach and have some level of self-reflection. And when you do think like that, you can extend the benefits of that thinking to many. The third lesson that I took from this book is that social and spatial inclusion are built into our cities. Now, this one's kind of difficult to wrap your head around at first. When you say toxic masculinity is built into the fabric of our cities, that skyscrapers or giant phallic representations of like male domination almost sounds ridiculous until you dig a little deeper. So patterns of gender-based discrimination are set in stone in our built environment. Like, to imagine the city as the sort of like neutral space that is like decoupled from all the biases that people have just overlooks the fact that people build them. Society's historical and ongoing ideas about proper gender roles are there in the glass and the concrete. Ask any woman who's got to navigate her way through a busy city street with a pram, or find access to a clean public toilet when she's pregnant, or a woman who wants to jog alone at night. We intuitively get the message from the spaces that they're not designed with us in mind. So think too of public spaces that are designed for young people. Like when you think about things that are imagined and implemented, we result in things like skate parks or football pitches. They're places that are designed with boys in mind, where girls often struggle to find acceptance. The needs of girls are so often ignored in these sort of planning and design decisions. And when you actually ask them what they want, they ask for things like covered areas to shield them from the weather and from being observed, because they're publicly on display all the time. They ask for places to sit face to face where they can talk and have a sense of intimacy. So when we think about this sort of intersectional lens that I'm talking here, we can see how the benefits could maybe be extended to sort of queer and trans youth as well, who pay that additional price for their visibility. Slide 4, sorry, the fourth lesson from this is that female friendship is an urban survival tool. So over the last week, I'm sure many of us have been reflecting on the ubiquity of the sort of text me when you get home message. I know for me, looking through my own WhatsApp and messages as well, it was quite sobering to realise how many of those messages I'd sent or received from friends. Like, this message alone like perfectly encapsulates the safety work that women do for themselves and for each other to look after each other. These little practices and rituals bond us to one another, but they also help us to make sense of fear and to find solidarity and strength in our shared experiences. Like, we all know that it's scary out there. We're always carrying a sense of things being able to turn because we've been observed, we've been harassed, we've been impacted because we're women in public spaces. So we're always carrying that weight of the questions that will be asked if we deviate from what seemed safe and sensible. You know, why did you dress that way? Why did you take that route? Why did you have your headphones in while you're walking at night? It's natural that we do want to leave cities for our own well-being. But when women leave the cities for suburbs, when they turn inwards, they lose much of that sense of solidarity and community that they get from other women, because the focus of their lives becomes their own home and less about fitting into a space and living in a space with others. In cities where women haven't become segregated like they have in the suburbs, in their self-contained homes, in their big cars, the trappings of home that are sort of engineered to keep us there, friendships can unfold on their own terms and confer lots and lots of benefits that we maybe don't think of. They allow women to find safety and comfort and fulfillment in one another, the same things that are traditionally promised by settling down, getting married and having a family. In cities, we can take up space together, we can fill streets and offices and social spaces, and give a sense of power in number, adding sort of beauty and texture through our presence. Laing-LeClerc sort of captures this by saying, by referring to it as the world-making endeavour of imagining a city of female friends. It's something that's a little devious and even defiant, and I just love that concept. So instead of a life that prioritises sort of heteronormativity like marriage and long-term commitment, property ownership and raising children, if you choose a life in a city, one that is centered around your friends, you can still have those close, supportive and deeply committed relationships throughout your whole life. It's an alternative model, and that actually in that way that the city offers a lot of freedom to women. The fifth lesson from this is that a safe feminist city won't rely on the police. Laing-LeClerc highlights the pitfalls of what she refers to and what others refer to as carceral feminism, which is a vision of anti-violence work that emphasises the harsh penalties and looks to almost the police, the criminal justice system and existing institutions to address gender-based violence. And this is really timely, I think, as well, because it typifies Priti Patel's justification of her police and crime bill. The ethos of that bill is almost like used as a cudgel to attack opponents, because it frames opposition to Priti Patel's bill as inherently anti-women. What Laing-LeClerc points out here is that, like, relying on the police and the criminal justice system to solve male violence is never going to work in a society where our institutions are racist and classist and misogynist by nature. Reliance on them will only serve to sort of amplify those pre-existing inequalities, and the measures will continually to overly impact those in the margins. By relying on the police as like our first line of defence against male violence, we participate in a system where little is actually done to help women, but more damage is done to others. Like, women's safety is almost used as like a convenient justification for policies and practices that actually do more harm to those people on the margins, which underlines the importance of my earlier point, is that to get to the root cause of the issue here, we've got to think about those who are disproportionately harmed, and that intersectional lens offers us a really good way to do that. So in conclusion, Feminist City, through these 5 things and more, Laing-LeClerc maps out an alternative vision of a city that works for all of us, not just by women. By thinking of us, you can extend the benefits to many. While the city is a constant battleground for gendered conflict, it might also be our best hope for forming sort of new social relations based on compassion, on justice and friendship. And when it does come to those sort of patriarchally sort of imposed costs, it offers us a chance for freedom and to fixate what's expected of us through work, through play, through lives that don't neatly follow the whole recipe for marriage, children and domesticity. So in this book, she not only maps out the ways that the city curtails our freedom, she also offers a tangible alternative. And she dares us to believe in a possibility that a feminist city can happen, that it's not some sort of utopia. We just need to scale up the things that the women and other groups are doing already by understanding the needs of the most vulnerable, and we'll start to believe women as a standard. We'll start to see patterns and relationships between private and public spheres of women's lives, and we'll be able to start to dismantle rape culture. Fear won't shape all of our actions and control how we exist in the world. She sums it up by saying, in a safe feminist city, women won't have to be courageous just to step outside the front door. Our energies won't be wasted on 1,000,001 safety precautions. In a city like this, women can be their full selves, and the world will see the full extent of what we have to offer. So it's a really, really fantastic book. And if we flip to the next slides, you can take down this URL, because Verso are offering this book free right now to everyone who wants to read it. These are just 5 of the lessons that I pulled out of it. I read it with my book group and we were all absolutely stunned. If you've read things like Invisible Women, this sort of really deepens that thought. And it's something that I know I'll come back to again and again. So if you want to get a hold of this right now, that short link will take you to Verso, where you can download this for free. So yeah, really, really excellent book, and I recommend that everybody reads that.